Okay, so we're recording. This
Yeah.
is Jacob Proctor in Brooklyn, New York, interviewing Trevor Paglen, who's in Northern California, for the Smithsonian Institution Archives of American Art's Pandemic Project. So Trevor, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jacob. It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. It's been a while.
It
I think
has.
we last saw each other in Berlin in the middle of the winter before any of this went down. So I mean, the first question I wanted to ask is sort of how are you doing, and kind of how has it been for you, and where were you when all of this started, and yeah.
So I am doing very good today. It's the first day I think where I could say that. I came here to my dad's farm from New York last night, and last night was the first night I've slept in about 6 months or what have you. So it's good to be out in the country. I guess when the pandemic hit, or at least when that kind of American phase of it hit, I was shooting photos in New Mexico, and I basically just decided it was probably too dangerous to fly back to New York, so I just drove, and then arrived in New York City, and everything was kind of locked down, and it's been really rough. I'm not gonna lie. It's been rough, kind of psychologically, in terms of being disconnected from people, disconnected from most things. It's been rough, in that time. I was putting together a show that's going to open next month, and sort of like trying to work under those conditions of quarantine and working remotely has been really hard. And then, just on top of that, the I'm sure everybody's saying this, but just that amount of ambient fear and ambient stress, just that feeling of the built environments around you being unsafe, is a kind of very baseline level of a very high level stress, and so and then of course on top of that there's a huge amount of like economic uncertainty, in the sense that like so many museums are closing or so many galleries are just not going to open up again. So there's that really professional world has in many ways ground to a halt. And basically what's happened is that everything that kind of got put on pause starting around February, everybody's kind of been holding their breath, and like now all those shows open. So I'm having like 3 shows open in the next month. But there's nothing after that. Like those are all the shows that we're supposed to have already opened, but after that there's nothing. And so that's so yeah, all these things on top of each other are add up to a really high amount of stress. And having said that, also that it's a very high level stress to just see how avoidable much of this was, and just how much of this is actually completely manufactured by an incompetent leadership, and a cruel leadership, and just having a government that actively chooses to harm people, in a situation that is already so precarious, and where people's livelihoods are so in such a vulnerable place. So I think that those are a lot of different things, a lot of things piled on top of each other.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tsunami of badness.
Yeah.
2020. And how is your, because you also have a footprint in Berlin
Yeah,
as well. I mean, how you haven't been there,
I've
obviously,
not been
but
here.
I mean, and that must, I know that that felt very strange for me to be sort of disconnected from like a big chunk of my life when I was in Berlin, when I was stuck in Berlin essentially,
Hmm.
and my friends and so many of my friends and family were here in New York. And
Yeah,
yeah,
so I have a small studio in New York that I work out of, but it's historically I've really traveled a lot for projects, whether for on the production side or to make them, to show them, etc. So the studio in New York is where I live, but it wasn't really set up to be a place where I live. And I have a studio in Berlin as well, where most of the people that I collaborate with work. And so obviously I wasn't able to go there, so we were trying to work remotely, and you can do it, but that doesn't mean that it's to be done, I guess, to quote the words of Chris Rock. But yeah, so it was just basically trying to work. Everything was like 20 times harder. I don't know if 20 times harder, but definitely 5 times harder.
it's a lot harder.
Um, yeah, so it just kind of felt like walking through some kind of like a mat, like a beach that's like made of really sticky sand or something like that. It feels like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have the feeling 100%, and it's a very weird, it's like trying to do
Yeah.
research without a library.
Yeah. And I think then those experiences in different places are also really different too. Where like I think that I get the sense in Berlin, they're kind of like, yeah, it's kind of fine, or I had another little project that I was doing with some folks in Australia, and they're like, do this, do this. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, that's just not where things are at. So to see how, uneven, it is kind of despite the fact that it's a global pandemic, it is the experience of that are very localized as well, you know. Um, so I guess that's been a part of it.
I mean, beyond the challenges of trying to collaborate with other people remotely,
Yeah,
do you think, obviously, as you said, like so much of your actual practice is in the researching
yeah,
stage, in the travel and
yeah,
the photographing in
yeah,
remote locations and being able to be mobile.
yeah.
And I wonder if you've had thoughts about sort of what the future looks like in terms of whether, if a lack of mobility is a condition that we're living with for a while, whether
Hmm.
that has any kind of direct knock-on effect on your own thinking about your work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the bigger question. I guess for me, that this is kind of happened in 3 phases, maybe, like in terms of the professional stuff was like phase one is like, okay, how do we stop hemorrhage, spending a bunch of money that we don't have, right? That there's no income for. So one is like trying to scale down a little bit, and then at the same time trying to find other projects for people to work on, because like a lot of stuff was just canceled and I didn't want to just like furlough everybody. So it's like, okay, what are all the projects that are sort of on the back burner or like in the basement that like we're always like, well, one day when things get slow, we'll do that. So kind of pulling all those out and dusting that off. And then it's kind of checking in, and the unemployment stuff around in Germany is quite different than in the US. So you can reduce people's hours, and the state kind of helps compensate for that. So we were just finding the right scale that we needed to be working at. So that was kind of phase one. And then phase two was trying to put this new body of work together and finishing that and thinking about, well, how do you fabricate something when all the fabricators are closed? How do like, so they're going through that whole process. And then again, I think it's been this process of, like, I guess for me, the analogy or the metaphor would be like trying to work underwater, like holding your breath, everything's slow, you can't really move, but you're trying to get stuff done. And then in kind of September, like nobody can hold their breath anymore. Okay, we need to, get the shows open. We need, like, regardless of if it's going to be open for a day and then close back down again. You know what I mean? Like all this stuff has to open, and then I think right now, and this is the phase that maybe started about 2 or 3 weeks ago, is just really starting to come to grips kind of emotionally as well as practically about how to do whatever it is that I do and or will do, like after September, and that's really confronting, to yeah to see the degree to which the infrastructures as well as the kind of economic and cultural environment, is, but I'm mostly they say the institutions that you're working with, they've really, I guess, have changed, or not even necessarily actively changed, but they have to change, because they can't support the model that was before. And so what is it going to mean to work within that? And especially if October or so comes, it starts getting cold, people have to start going inside, if people start getting sick again, I really don't know what happens if there's another quarantine. Like, it's really hard to see much of this surviving, and that's really confronting.
Yeah, that's it's terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I mean, I hope that personally, I hope that we do manage to get through it without another quarantine. But I mean, in this, in the sense that I think what you were saying about the precarity of institutions, or the
Mm-hmm.
sense that, like, the institutional model that has been kind of more or less functional, or at least that we're used to, if
Mm-hmm.
it's no longer viable, I mean, do you have thoughts about sort of what could be a better option, or what could work, what could or might be coming?
I do, but I don't know that there's a better option or this or that. So I guess, like, it's kind of obvious that there's two directions that things are going in. Like, one is everything online on one hand, and then the other one is like everything's super local, everything's super, super local. Like, no, like, we don't imagine ourselves as being global institutions anymore. Or, we, meaning like museums, for example, or different
Sure.
spaces, and neither one of those are things that I had certainly been particularly interested in, to be honest with you, or, kind of set up to do, and um, so I'm looking at some stuff and seeing what's possible. So for the November show, actually in the studio we built, as many people are trying to do, thinking about how do you build an exhibition that is natively kind of in space as well as online. So we took a lot of the hardware that we'd been using for this performance that I developed with the Kronos Quartet. They were where the quartet's playing. We have all these cameras and stuff set up around them and are streaming that to a screen behind them. So took all that hardware and are adopting it to an exhibition. Like, can you create an exhibition that's kind of constantly being streamed online, and taking that very seriously as like that, as a medium, as a way. In other words, you usually think about exhibitions in space. You send in a photographer, they photograph it, the documentation's online. Well, what if you don't think about it that way? What if you think about it like some cameras and some stuff and some walls and some lights and some screens, or whatever it is, you put all that stuff together? So that's one direction. I'm going to start kind of a friend of mine is sort of trying to start an experimental art school that'll all be online. So I'm going to teach like an introduction to photography class on that, which is super weird. That's never something that had even crossed my mind as something that I would ever do. And then I think, and then just beyond that, I'm just thinking about what you can do and what, and how much, I guess, like what kind of show I want to run, for lack of a better word, like how big should it be? How much stuff should I be responsible for? What should the capacity be? Should I try to branch out even more? Like in the studio, for example, we've done a ton of work around like artificial intelligence and computer vision. We've built a lot of tools to be able to look at things like data sets and things like that. So do I try to branch out and say like, okay, here's all these resources that I just built for my own work. Are those going to be helpful to other people? And on the other hand, like, do you really want to support that? So it's just a lot of questions like that. In other words, what should the boundaries of this practice be? And I think that's, yeah, something that I really is maybe I think that was a fun thing to think about when you didn't have to. And that you have to, it's a lot less fun.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, as the world becomes, as we're forced into virtuality, is thinking about virtuality so exciting, and
Yeah.
like all the promises now seem
Yeah.
a little farther away.
Yeah.
I mean, are there stories? I mean, given that you are also, a pretty keen observer of the world around you, are there narratives that you think are getting lost in the way that the media is talking about the situation, and in the way that like even the experts are sort of in the story that's being told?
I think to me again, I think this is highly uneven, in terms of where people are, what neighborhoods they live in, what are their jobs and stuff like that. But, for me, certainly, especially in New York, I mean, I guess people are talking about that stress and like that, people losing your minds, especially people with kids and stuff like that. But that's really, I don't actually know how you communicate that, And for me, for a long time, for like months, like just even walking around New York City, I'm like, how are people just like not melting down on the streets? You know what I mean? Like nonstop, because I certainly felt like I was, and yeah, I guess um, that sense of stress, that sense of just uncertainty is just so like debilitating, I think. And yeah, I guess for me that's certainly one thing where like the media that you see, or the way that you know that is something that's very visceral and very affective, and it's a feeling that I don't know that can be conveyed in any other media other than you kind of feeling it yourself in.
Well, I think I told you that when I came back to New York in the middle of June, I felt like the whole city had PTSD.
Yeah.
Everyone was just kind of, and it sounds like that's kind of what you're describing, is this sense like that there's been a kind of psychological trauma that it's going to maybe take a lot. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it take a while to deal for people to figure out how to.
I think so. And I mean, for me, I'm really grateful to be able to have come to California. I mean, yesterday I flew for the first time since like February, which is a whole another super weird thing. But I do, yeah. But like literally, I think like nobody's sleeping. Nobody's kind of like, you, people are either like losing tons of weight or gaining tons of weight, or, you know, just everything is, yeah, it's just really, yeah, I guess like kind of, I guess what I said in the beginning, which is that this level of ambient stress is so high, you know, and then a lot of anger about the degree to which is how much of it is just totally totally unnecessary, and it's just completely the result of a refusal, you know, for the you know, our institutions to kind of take responsibility, or not even take responsibility, just try to even imagine helping. Like just not even like preventing, you know, other people from helping.
To function.
Yeah, functioning, right, I guess.
Well, thank you so much
Well, thank you.
for taking the time. We really appreciate it. And I wish you all the best health. And I hope that
Thank
we
you.
get to see each other again soon in person.
Beautiful, man. It's great to see you, Jacob. Take care.
You too, man. Ciao.
Bye.